As you're looking through the internet, seeing everyone else catching fish, it's easy to ask, what baits are they using? What lakes are they at? And what secrets do they have? The real secret to fishing is understanding the fish, becoming confident in tactics, and knowing where to find them. On this episode of Secrets to Fishing, Peter shares what he does to find early season largemouth bass in moving water, as well as what slow, medium, and fast speed presentations to throw that will get the fish to bite. Then, Peter fills up the workbench and breaks down spin cast, spinning, and bait casting reels that need a springtime cleaning and some fresh line. This episode is presented by ShopMissouriSecrets.com and North Country Marine and Motorsports. Unlocking Early Springtime Largemouth is brought to you by ShopMissouriSecrets.com.
There you go, that's a good cast. It's early spring right now, and in North Dakota, a lot of the lakes that have ice are either too rotten to go fish on, or there isn't enough open water to shore fish from. So today we're at a power plant lake that has a lot of really warm water, and right now the bluegills, crappies, and largemouth are making their seasonal moves for the pre-spawn period. So today we're going to go through a couple of basic fundamentals that'll help you catch more fish on a pressured lake like this one. So let's get it. So for years we came out to this lake to catch crappie and bluegill with slip bobbers and small jigs, and occasionally accidentally caught a largemouth as they run into our baits. But when I figured out that there was a really hot bite with largemouth, I wanted to come out here and try and get on that bite. And once I actually came out here to catch largemouth, I had a really hard time catching them. And we heard stories from people all the time saying that there's a lot of fish to be got here. Just up this channel we're fishing in is where the state record largemouth came out of. So there's big fish in this lake, and there's a lot of fish in this lake. And over the years, as I've been fishing this lake really consistently, the one thing I've learned that is very important here is bait placement and how much more fish I've caught because of that. So I'm just going to point out a few things and help you apply it to any lake that you go and fish. So the one thing I've learned over the years is where the fish are at throughout the day. So the spot we're at right now is an outflow channel that comes from the power plant. So there's a lot of warm water right here. During the evening and throughout the night, these fish are moving up and throughout this channel, which is the outflow from the power plant. So it's really warm water. And then as that sun starts to rise in the morning, these fish are going to spread out and move shallow. And then eventually when the sun's pretty high in the sky, these fish are going to move behind rocks and up super shallow throughout the lake as the day progresses. Now where we're fishing right now is we got to treat this just like a river. On this side of the channel that we're standing on, there's a couple steps that we can fish, that these fish are moving throughout. And there's a few spots where you can throw your bait and catch a fish here. But on the other side of this channel where we're trying to place our bait are a whole bunch of rocks that create eddies. And just like a river, these fish are moving into those eddies in the slack water pockets, so they don't have to use up a whole lot of energy. And the same is true with where this water dumps into the lake, is there's 2 points and a channel that this water is moving through that these fish are relating to. So just like here, there's steps and then those eddies with slack water that these fish can swim around in. So, and as you can see, where this calm water is on the outside of this channel, that's where one of the steps are. So right now, it's the perfect time of year to throw jigs for crappies and bass, because they're just sitting there waiting for something to float by and eat. So what I'm doing right now is I'm casting a tube to the other side of the channel, and what I'm looking for is every possible location that an eddy could be at. So if I pick out that rock right in front of me, I cast way over to it, and if there's a fish there, you're gonna know pretty quick because they're gonna come up and grab that bait right away. But usually after 5-10 seconds of no activity, what I figured out is usually you're not going to get bit. So bring up your bait and then find the next rock and just do the same thing. So when you're shore fishing at a spot like we're at now, you're going to tend to get a lot of snags. Now, there's a lot of ways you can get your baits back if you don't want to break it off. The way I prefer to do it is you open up your reel, give some slack line, and you grab the line right in front of your reel, and then you will jerk your rod up and let go of the line, and it's going to snap that line like that. Now what that's doing is just shaking that bait around, and it's just going to pop that hook out. There we go, got it off. Once you get the snag undone, always bring your bait back up and just check on the hook and make sure it's sharp and straight and nothing broke off. So yeah, I think we're doing good here. Check your line as well, make sure there's no frays. Now, like I said, there's a lot of small fish in this lake, but the one thing that really got me going here is the big fish that you can catch here. A few years ago, we were here filming a buzz bite report, and I had the chance to help a guy bring up a 7-pound, 2-ounce largemouth from a few feet over there. So there's some big bass in this lake. It's just this time of year, you're gonna catch the small males before you catch any decent sized fish. But when that spawn bite starts, oh man, it's just lights out.
This coronavirus, health officials continuing to urge people to stay at home.
So here along these shelves, one thing we just saw is there's bass chasing little bluegills along here. These bluegills will swim along these shelves, and I think I saw 2 or 3 bass chasing a whole pile of gills. So just getting your bait along that shelf. Sometimes those bass will come up and just hammer it. So one thing that's also very important is to switch up your presentations and your tactics. So I got a few bites on this white tube, but I'm just going to cut that off here and set it to the side, and I'm going to switch over to a Nico rig, and I'll show you what that consists of here. So the first thing I'm going to grab is an appropriately sized hook. So I got a whole bunch of these hooks here, and let's see, I'm just going to grab this size hook here. It's kind of like a heavier duty Aberdeen style hook with a 3-degree offset. And what I'm going to do here is just tie this on with a polymer knot. Cut the tag end off there. Now what I'm going to do is grab a worm. So you can use all sorts of different sized worms with this, but what I'm going to do is grab a 5-inch bubblegum stick worm. This is a juice bait stick worm. And there's a bunch of parts to this rig. The next part, so I'm going to grab this is just again a VMC wacky rig tool with these little rings on them. So I'm just going to put the worm in the tube and slide one of these clear rings on. Next, what I'm going to do is grab this hook. Now I'm going to put the third component on the bigger end of the worm here. So I'm going to take the point of the hook and go up this way so it sits like that. And then the final component of this rig, and this is just going to help me get the bait to the other side where these fish are, is to grab a smaller sized worm weight, just like this one. And then I'm going to take it and just push it in to that bigger end of the worm, just like that. That right there is a Nico rig, and this weight is going to help me get this worm to the other side of the channel where these fish are sitting at. So again, we know that the fish are on the other side of this channel, but I'm just going to offer them something different in a different color and presentation. And we'll see if this guy can do it. That's a really, really good cast there. So I hit this whole entire other side of the shoreline with this tube I was just using. But now I'm gonna go and hit the same exact spots with this Nico rig and just jiggle it there for a few seconds. Something a lot slower that these fish can get a better look at and have more time to eat it. Because it's a little bit heavier bait and because it's kind of a pencil style bait, I can fish it a lot further into the deeper parts of the channel without the rig getting picked up by the current and going really, really far down the channel. So if there are some fish down in a little bit deeper areas of this channel, I'll be able to find them here. So I've hit the other side of this channel pretty hard with a few different baits. So now I'm gonna start fishing on this close side of the channel where a couple of these ledges are that these fish like to travel along. So I'm just gonna put my bait a few feet off the shoreline, and as these fish are moving along, if they run into this bait, they're just gonna grab it and keep going. So what we're doing right now is just starting up current and moving down current with our casts and just finding points where we can place our bait and hope we get bit. So I got a bunch more bites, but no commitments to these fish. So now what I'm gonna start throwing is a faster moving bait. This is a prototype chatterbait that I've been making, and it's got a big swim bait on the back. So something that probably looks like a really nice bait fish. Hope we can get some takers on it, because we started with some slow moving baits and we're just moving our way up in speed. So we figured out that these bass are chasing some bait. So hopefully this moving chatterbait is gonna get some good bites. Oh, that was really cool. That's a perfect example of what these fish are doing. I bounced this chatterbait right off the rocks, and this chatterbait immediately got blown up when it hit the water. I'm gonna check this out. I'm gonna try and make that same cast. Now I know there's a fish there. And that tells me something too, that if these fish are gonna be feeding upward, I might switch over to a top water and see if they'll blow up on that, because that was a really, really good bite there. And then I can start fishing this chatterbait a little higher in the water column too. So the last thing we're gonna try is dragging some baits through the middle of the channel. So we've hit both edges of the channel pretty hard with a whole bunch of different baits. So now what I'm gonna do is drag a couple jigs through the middle of the channel, like this big 5/8 ounce skirted jig, and then a smaller, lighter jig, like the simple fork-tail minnow on a Ned head. So I got two different speeds I can play with, and then figure out what the fish want. This bigger jig I have tied on this bait caster is 5/8 ounce, so I can make a good long cast and then fish it a little bit faster closer to the bottom. Give it a couple hops every now and then drag it along. And then the smaller jig with that little fork-tail minnow, I'm gonna fish it super, super slow and keep it constantly on the bottom and figure out if they're gonna go after something moving fast or slow. So we can apply these principles to every part of the lake here, but just realize there isn't any moving water any other place. So those fish, wherever they're sitting, could be facing any direction they want to be instead of facing into the current. They don't seem to be wanting this big old jig here. I'm gonna switch over to this smaller jig and this minnow and fish it a lot slower here. The one thing that's important to remember when fishing a slower bait like this is to keep your cadence the same. So I'm just gonna slowly reel this along the bottom here. And really, I'm just picking up the slack line as this bait's tumbling down the current here. Oh, there he is. See what we got here. So That's a fun bass to catch. These are the guys you're going to catch a lot throughout this pre-spawn period. When you put together the basic fundamentals like we were teaching today, you figure out what these fish are doing throughout the day and why they're doing it, you're going to have fun catching more fish.
Well, let me tell you about Sakakawea State University, the official educational choice of Secrets to Fishing TV.
How old do you have to be to go to Sakakawea State University?
Well, Cohen, I started when I was 5, and at Sakakawea State University, a lot of people have learned what it takes to stay in schools.
I learned patience and to always stay humble at Sakakawea State University.
Wait, did somebody say Sakakawea State University? Most important thing, stay in schools.
I've earned money because I learned to stay in schools.
We wouldn't be where we are today if we hadn't stayed in school.
What do I have to do to stay in schools?
All you gotta do is go to Sakakawea State University Facebook page and learn all sorts of fish facts, and then go fishing.
Hi, Peter. Hey, I wish I went to Sakakawea State University.
I wish my kid would have picked Sakakawea State University.
Sakakawea State University, the official Fish Facts Facebook page and clothing line of Secrets to Fishing TV.
I invented Sakakawea State University.
This segment of Secrets to Fishing is brought to you by Brewer Agri Outdoors.
It's finally that time of year again, where springtime is opening up all the lakes and rivers to get ready for an open water bite. Which means you gotta make sure your rods and reels are ready to catch fish. Regardless if it's a spinning reel, bait casting reel, or a spin cast reel, here's a few things I go over with my equipment to make sure it's ready to catch fish this spring when Mother Nature lets me hit the water. First, I'm gonna do a quick look over on the external parts of the reel. You're gonna make sure that the reel seat isn't cracked or damaged. And then make sure your reel handle's good and aligned and that nothing's up with the bail or the spool itself. That looks pretty good. And then next I'm just gonna listen for any dirt noise. Yeah, that one sounds pretty good. Let's take a look at this one. Oh, there's a lot of noise there. Yep, yeah, that's a lot of noise. Let's open this one up first and take a look. First thing I want to do is lay down a towel, make sure nothing greasy gets on the table. Then just start taking the reel apart. Oh man, there's a lot of dirt here. So the first thing you can do with these is just take the whole assembly off the shell. So there's not a whole lot with these spin cast reels to grease and oil because they're pretty bulletproof in that regard, but I'm just going to start taking a toothbrush to this and getting all that grime and sand off. So once you think you got all the dirt and sand out of your reel, you just take a paper towel and start wiping it down. Get some of the wet stuff from the sand and dirt that'll mix with the grease. If you have to, don't be afraid to rinse your reels under some water. Just make sure you give it ample time to dry once you do that. And another way to get some dirt out in some of those hard to reach places is canned air, or just use an air compressor attachment. Once this is all dry and ready to go, we'll put some more line on and put it all back together and put her back on the rod to go fish. Now when we first looked at this, it didn't sound like there was any dirt or sand inside of it, but it is a little stiff from what it normally should be. So I'm just going to show you how I take a spinning reel apart and fix that problem. So the first thing is you just twist your spool drag knob until it completely comes off, and then Your spool of line will come off. And then there's a whole bunch of gears and bearings inside of here, so make sure none of these fly out and disappear on the floor forever. And then you just take these little parts off. The one thing I always do when taking a reel apart is I set the individual pieces that come off just in a nice even line, keeping the order so I can put it back together with ease, not struggle and have to look it up on the internet. So once I got these first components taken apart, what I'm going to do next is start taking apart. There's a nut here and a screw that looks like it's a flathead. So I'm going to take the screw out first. Next part is there's that nut right along the shaft here. So we got to get a wrench, and crescent wrenches work pretty well for this. And just gently twist that off. There you go. Once you break it free, it's just super easy to take it off with your fingers. Now this is that little piece that was connected to that screw, holding it all together. And now that whole reel assembly come off right there. So this is your bail right there. I'll set that in line here. So now we're in the guts of the reel, where all the bearings and all the reel part happens. So I'm just going to grab the reel oil and put a drop right by that bearing here, and then down the spindle hole. You don't need a whole lot. And just keep on moving. Make sure you put everything back together and align it all right. That looks good. So one thing you got to make sure that you don't do is over tighten screws. Just make sure that the screws and nuts are all nice and snug and that everything lines up correctly. Put your pieces back together. Feel a lot better there. All right, on to the next one. Now when it comes to bait casters, the place that you're going to find most of the dirt and sand is in the spool itself. And with most bait casters, you just flip a small switch on the bottom side of the reel, take out this door, and the whole spool will come right out of the reel. And this one seemed to be working completely fine, so there's really no point in taking the whole thing apart and looking it over. I'm just going to do a quick glance of the spool. That looks pretty good. And the inside of the door here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the spool in a little bit here first and put just one small drop of oil into the main gear assembly. Now that I got that spool back in, it's just as simple as pushing that door back in and flipping that lever, and we're all good to go. And then another place on bait casters to check is the spool drag, this knob here. And then what gets a lot of anglers in trouble is the actual handle itself, because sometimes the nut will come loose. And I've experienced the whole handle flying off while I'm fishing. So just make sure that's good and tight. Doesn't seem to be moving too much at all. Yep, this one seems to be good working order. I'm just going to put some new line on it, put it back on my rod, ready to go. Now let's take a look at fishing line. When it comes to spin casting reels, a lot of people put heavy line on in hopes that it'll last, but these reels tend to be used with kids for pan fishing more often. So what we like to do is use 6 to 8 pound mono and then replace it a few times throughout the summer, because it's a lot easier to cut through a spool of mono than it is a bunch of braid. Next, when it comes to monofilament, we like to replace it every spring, because when it's sitting throughout the winter, freezing and thawing constantly, it becomes very brittle, which can be tough to cast on a spinning reel. And then it also develops line memory, which can be very frustrating. And then when it comes to braid, what we like to do with our reels is just strip 8 to 10 feet off the spool, feeling for any nicks or frays, and then any spot that feels or looks chalky. And if you're not sure about the braid, the one thing you can do is reverse the line onto another reel. So the front part of this line becomes the backing on this second reel. And then finally, you can just replace the line altogether. When it comes to putting line on your spool, with monofilament, you can just go ahead and tie it on and go. But with braid, there's a couple things you gotta look for. If your reels don't have tie-off locations for braid, a couple things you can do is simply put a piece of electrical tape around the spool or put a couple layers of monofilament backing on so the braid doesn't slip around the spool. Now the last thing you got to do, put your rods and reels together, rig them up the way you want to fish, and when you hit the water, you know your reels won't let you down.
This week's Leaving Ripples is brought to you by MPR Models.
You may want to be trusted or even feel that you deserve to be trusted. But remember, trust is built one step at a time and can be broken with only one wrong move. It's all about being patient, making wise decisions, and leaving ripples.
Thank you to these great partners for making Secrets to Fishing possible.